Hello, everyone, and welcome to ADDitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast. We hope everyone is staying safe and staying well. We are pleased to have Linda Walker here to talk about better time management and increased productivity during the pandemic, a topic most of us can use some help with. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive around an hour after the live broadcast. For those of you listening in replay or podcast mode, you can visit ADDitudemag.com and search Podcast 341 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. Now for today's topic, strategies for improving time management and productivity during COVID. Time management is harder than ever for adults with ADHD. When days blur into each other, a lack of visible progress robs you of motivation. You face more distractions stuck at home with 3 kids, a dog, a cat, and a goldfish. Your work-from-home partner, homeschooling children, and tougher-than-ever job compete for your time. And time blindness is exacerbated because the pandemic has robbed us of clues for when to do things. Coach Linda Walker will give us the tools and perspective on how to take the right action at the right time. Linda is a trainer and coach for entrepreneurs, adults with ADHD, and other creative geniuses. Since 2005, she has created programs for creative geniuses on the journey toward productivity that combine group coaching, online training, and community. She's the author of With Time to Spare, the ultimate guide to peak performance for entrepreneurs, adults with ADHD, and other creative geniuses. You can ask questions of Linda during her presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. So with all that being said, I'll turn it over to Linda. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here. So there I go. Okay, so today we'll be talking about putting together some structure to make sure, especially with COVID times, I find everything is so nebulous. We don't know when's Monday, when's Thursday. I don't know how many times it's happened that people think they're in the weekend, but it's actually a work week. You want to make sure that you're able to enable focused work, and that's a really big challenge right now. Optimize your productivity, and there's things that you can do that make you more effective. So maybe you might have to squeeze your time in, but you'll be more effective and you'll be able to achieve as much if you're more effective. We'll talk about limiting distractions, using some actionable steps, and we'll also look at some creative approaches. I'm only going to be touching on a few because there is only a short time to be going through this, but I know that you yourselves have probably found some really creative things or creative approaches. I mean, one of the challenges, one of the non-challenges of ADHD is that creativity. So let's talk a little bit about why this pandemic is such a challenge for most people. Well, the first thing is there's a huge loss of structure. Now, before the pandemic, a lot of my clients were people who worked for someone else, left that job and decided to work for themselves. And often the number one challenge that they're facing is the fact that they don't have any more structure. In the past, somebody told them what to do, when to do it, and so on. There were other people around and so on. Now they're on their own and they're having to deal with that. Well, that's kind of what's happening right now, but now it's at a bigger scale because it's pretty much everyone that's in the same boat. So that loss of structure is massive, and we'll be talking about things that you can do to improve that. The same thing with distractions. Now not only do you have work distractions, all of the communications that are coming in, but also there are possibly kids, there are possibly pets, there's a spouse that possibly a spouse. But even if there isn't, I have a client who's a lawyer her biggest challenge in terms of distractions is all the things that she has to do in the house. She needs to do her laundry. So all of these things are not structured in her day to day. So she's doing it in the middle of the day and forgetting to do things that are much more impactful and important. You're also looking at challenges with having some time to focus. It's becoming more challenging to focus. There is very little time to be able to do that. So we'll look at how you can actually improve that. There's no designated space. My daughter, who is a researcher, and her husband is an accountant, the two of them ended up working from home. And they have 3 kids and a cat, no goldfish. But the challenge was each one requires focus to be able to work. So they can't work with the kids screaming. The kids are all pretty young. So each one goes at their separate time to different places. But each time for example, the accountant, my son-in-law, ends up going in his son's room on a little desk, because the son is 7 years old. He's sitting on a little desk with all of his papers. But when he's finished, he can't leave the stuff there. He has to take it with him. So there's no designated space for work. And of course, there's some drop-ins in terms of product. There's a drop in productivity, I should say, because of all of these different things. So it makes it more challenging. Some people are working longer hours, weekends, nights, and so on. So let's look at what you're going to need to overcome these challenges. So the first one is creating that structure. Having that structure will already anchor you even more. So we'll talk more. These are all things that we're going to be talking more in detail. Of course, there's planning. And a lot of people don't like the idea of planning, but I'll tell you, I'll explain why it's really important, especially now, but it's always important if you have ADHD. Ways to optimize your productivity by improving your brain's ability to focus. We'll also talk about limiting distractions, because that's definitely a challenge. And of course, finding creative ways to manage despite it all, because even if you do everything right, it's still going to be challenging to work. ADHDers struggle when they're working all by themselves. Even if it's quiet, there's some struggle there, because there's still it's still easy to get distracted by communication and so on. So let's look at structure. So the number one structure that I think you really need to create for yourself is sleep. Sleep is the number one. It is probably the thing that tends to be the first thing that gets pushed to the wayside. People end up working late in the night. They wake up at weird times, or they wake up early because there's kids that are waking them up. So they haven't had sufficient sleep. Your ADHD brain works much harder than neurotypical's brain. And so as a result, you really need a good 7 to 9 hours of sleep. The majority of people. There are a few people who don't need as much, but they'll need a nap in the afternoon. So sleep is an important, and every time I work with clients who are struggling, that is the first thing that we'll look at is sleep. The same with physical activity. If you're sitting all day long, you are not, it's much more difficult to focus if you're sitting all day long. So it's a good idea every now and then to work standing up. Not easy to do when you have a computer. If you have a laptop, you could go, let's say, to a counter. I have a sit-stand desk. I sit half the time. I sit and I stand half the time. But if you can't do that, for example, you could, cardio exercise is truly important. Some people say, I exercise, but they're doing weight training. It's not quite the same. Cardio will make your heart rate go faster. It actually increases adrenaline and it improves your ability to focus. There's quite a few studies about that. The next thing is, of course, a morning ritual. So some of this stuff, to get that in place, a morning ritual is very helpful. If you start the day right, you will find yourself having a better day. And that's time after time. I just ended a group coaching program yesterday on planning. And that was one of the things that people all mention is that morning routine. looking at their calendar, making sure that they're taking care of their sleep and physical activity, but also all of the other dressing as if they were going to work. So it means grooming, it means dressing yourself. You don't have to be wearing a suit and tie if that's what you usually wear at work. But we find, and if you've noticed ever before, if you've ever worked in a company where you have a period, a day or a half a day, we did that on Fridays in the summer. On Friday, we had casual day. Well, on casual day, I found people were a lot less, not productive. I'm not sure about their productivity, but definitely a lot less professional in their demeanor. So that's also really important. You want to show up still professional. And then some downtime. That is one of those things that you have a tendency to push to the wayside. Downtime is so important for ADHDers, and downtime could be time to reflect. It could be meditation. It could be just that walk in the morning or that walk in the evening, or even some creative time. I find creative work like writing or drawing or those types of things can be very, very helpful because it tends to reduce the amount of stress that you're dealing with, because you do deal with a lot more stress than most. But on top of that, COVID stress is a real thing. That's not imagined. So most people will say, planning, no way, because that's one of the first things I'll tell them. Well, to be able to do that, you're going to need to plan. And the tendency is to think that planning is going to stop you from being free. And in fact, it's actually the opposite. A lot of people say, well, if I don't plan, I won't mess it up. So unfortunately, you may not necessarily mess up the plan, but you will still mess up because you'll miss some things. Some people will say, well, it never worked for me in the past, so why should I go ahead and do that? It's not going to work for me. Well, it's a good chance. There's a good chance that it didn't work for you because you didn't follow an approach that worked for you. For ADHDers, if you're using a neurotypical approach, that doesn't always work. There are a lot of benefits to planning. For example, you increase your autonomy. People look at you differently. ADHDers tend to march by the beat of their own drum. So if you are planning, you are the one who is deciding what needs to be done when. You are in control. The next thing is, of course, you will also increase your credibility, because if you're planning, you're getting things done at the time or when you said or committed to doing them. And so you're a lot less likely to let things fall to the wayside. And then finally, studies have shown that, and there's a 2018 study that showed that when people take the time to plan, to set an intention, determine when and where they're going to do it or how they're going to do it, they tend to procrastinate a lot less, especially if you plan properly. And I'll talk about that momentarily. Now, if you don't plan at all, things can go really wrong, very, very wrong. So obviously, this is based on someone who has not planned what was coming up afterwards. So one of the other challenges, I think, is if you don't plan, you find yourself letting things fall through the wayside or falling through the cracks, and then you're running around trying to keep up, and that increases your level of stress. It also reduces your self-confidence. So let's talk a little bit about the appropriate planning process. First of all, you need a 100% reliable planning process that works with your brain in mind, not something that is made for Joe Schmo neurotypical. It doesn't work for you. You need some approach that looks at the situations that ADHDers deal with. You have some executive function challenges. You tend to also be a big picture thinker. Big picture thinkers are not really detail oriented, and most traditional time management systems tend to be detail oriented. Now, you will go from the big picture and get a little bit more nitty gritty to determine specifically what you have to do, but you start with the big picture. So you can see what's going on. You can see all the pieces that are going on. Now, planning with the big picture in mind is difficult to do if you're doing it moment by moment. You really, ideally, you want to sit once a week, look at what projects you have going on, and determine the best time that they should be done. That will allow you to have simplified prioritizing. Now, prioritizing is another challenge that people with ADHD have. If you're prioritizing one task against another, that can take hours to do. I've had a client, one of my first clients came to me. She was in she worked in construction, and would go and meet clients to see what they had, the work that they had to do, would prepare a proposal and so on, and then do the work or bring in a team to do the work. One of her big challenge was if a customer called her and canceled at the last minute, she would go through her massive to-do list then to determine what can I do for this next hour and a half that I had planned to see this client. So she's going through that to-do list. By the time she finally decides what she's going to do, most of that time has elapsed. So she's lost that opportunity. If you're, the other thing is that every time you're prioritizing is something that requires a lot of mental work. It requires mental work in your executive functions. Executive functions for ADHDers are a problem. So you do need to be very mindful of that. Everything that you do needs to really take care of reducing how much reliance you, especially on things that could be done differently, how much reliance you put on your executive function, so that those executive functions have the energy, because energy in the mind, in your brain, is finite. There's only so much energy that you have. So if you exhaust your prefrontal cortex with prioritizing a to-do list, you will not have the energy or the prefrontal cortex energy to be able to do tasks that require high-level thinking. You also want to consider, that's a really important piece of the puzzle, is more immediate completion. So when you're planning, you want to know, you want to be able to complete work much more quickly, so that, because you need immediate gratification. You need that dopamine hit. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that allows you to feel pleasure. And ADHDers really struggle with the dopamine system. And so you need to really, really reduce the amount of time it takes between when you start a task and when you see that you've made progress. And there's different ways of doing that. You know, more immediate completion can be done, or more immediate gratification can be had if your tasks are a little bit more specific or easier to measure. Next thing is having a system that's 100% effective and that you follow rigorously. Very difficult for people with ADHD. That's why when I'm training people to plan, it's a step-by-step process. We learn a little bit at a time. I don't believe in trying to do everything all at once. It doesn't work. We don't learn. Nobody learns that way. Humans learn one step at a time. That's how you learn to walk. That's how you learn to talk. Everything we do is a little bit at a time, and we need to remember that when we're learning something. But having a rigorous system where there are no holes and nothing can fall through the cracks is really important. And then the final piece that I think is truly important, especially for ADHDers, is being able to manage energy, not just time. Now, I will talk about that a little bit more in detail. I don't want to go into too many details right now with that, because we're going to run out of time. So let's talk about planning itself. How do you go about, what are the things, the tools that you're going to need? So a foundational piece to planning is the agenda. You have memory, especially short-term memory or really working memory issues. So you don't remember. I remember when my husband and I, when we first, actually before we even knew that Dwayne had ADHD, I would ask him to do things, and he looked so incredibly sincere and said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it for you, because I was already pretty stretched thin. I have a young daughter with ADHD. Well, she's not young anymore, but she was ADHD and learning disabilities. I had an older daughter who was a brainiac, but required someone to talk to her and someone to pay attention to her once in a while. Of course, there's a household. I worked full time. All of that makes it very challenging. So I would ask Dwayne to help me, and he was more than willing to do it. And then he would forget. He would forget his commitment. And what happened, he lost credibility with me. So among the first things you want to put in your calendar are your routines, or I prefer to use the word ritual. A lot of people, especially ADHDers, have an allergy around routines. Routines are just a sequence of tasks that you do in the same way every time. You actually have a whole bunch of routines. When you put on your pants, I'm hoping you're wearing pants, but if you're not, it's okay, because we can't see you. But if you're wearing pants or you're putting on your pants, observe which leg you always put your pants in first, or you put in your pants first. It's always the same leg. There are 20 different ways, if not more, to tie a lace on a shoe. You tend to tie it the same way every single time. You get up, you get dressed, you eat, you brush your teeth, hopefully, and there's a whole bunch of things. And you get dressed before you meet people. So there are a whole lot of things that you do that you don't see as ritual or routine, but they are. And so routines need to be in place. Your rituals need to be in place. And that includes your sleep, your making sure that you get to bed on time and so on, your exercise, your downtime, and all of this kind of stuff. You need to also put appointments with others. And in COVID time, most of us are not meeting face-to-face, but we are meeting in Zoom, or we are meeting on these types of platforms, video conferencing platforms, or we might talk on the phone. Make sure you include in the description of the task the actual video conference access code. I see so many people scrambling to try, at the last minute, they're trying to find their, the code, and they can't find it. If there's anything that you could do that will help you, and you should do this anytime, even when you go back to non-COVID times, is include, the information that you need, what you need to also have on hand. I have an appointment with my daughter at the employment service next week, and we need some documents. Well, when they told me about it, I wrote them down. I put it in my agenda to make sure that she knew what she needed to bring. And make sure you also include work that you have planned to do. So in other words, you're making appointments with yourself, and you need to respect them. Now, a lot of people tell me, oh, I make appointments with others and I keep those. I don't keep appointments with myself. And I'll tell them it's truly important that you keep appointments with yourself, because when you stop doing that, you eventually erode your self-esteem, your self-confidence. You start not believing in your ability to achieve anything. And when you do that, how are you going to get anything done? Part of motivation is fed by our belief that things can happen, that we can make things happen. So if you don't respect your plan, you will eventually lose that ability to feel like you'll be able to achieve something. The other thing that you might want to look at, the way you might want to think about it, is most of our appointments, most of the things that we plan to do ourselves is for someone else. It's either for a client or for a colleague or for your boss. Or, for example, in my case, if I'm doing marketing, it may not be for one particular client, but I'm trying to educate a whole bunch of clients. So if you keep that in mind, think of it as if you're having an appointment for those people. And that might change your belief around that. And finally, you need to make sure fun and relaxation is in there. And a lot of people don't like to plan fun and relaxation, but you will have more fun and more relaxation if you plan for it. You also want to schedule specific windows of time using time boxing. Now, time boxing is an approach that we use to determine a particular start time for your task and a particular end time for your task. Not easy to do when you feel like I can't estimate how long things take to do. And that's true. That's a challenge for ADHD. So you want to, what I usually tell my clients, if you've never done the task before, or you've never paid attention to how long it actually took you to do it, triple the amount of time that you estimate it'll take. And you'll be closer to the real deal. And then you want to use task batching. Task batching allows you to reduce the number of transitions that you make. There's some research that shows that people who, when we transition from one task to another constantly, we lose. This is neurotypicals lose 30% of their productivity. That means a day and some per week is lost just to transitions. For ADHDers, I wouldn't be surprised if it was longer than that, if it was closer to 50% lost productivity, because you struggle with keeping, with staying focused on one task. It takes you a long time to switch from one task to the next, to shift from one thing to the next. So by taking more time, when you go back, if you go back to the original task that you were doing, you've lost some time getting out of whatever you called your attention. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a phone call, and then to pull yourself back into what you had planned to do or what you wanted to do in the first place. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about some of the stuff that you could do for that. But one really important tool to do that is using task batching. And that means having specific periods each day. So for example, I'm actually training myself in email because unfortunately I do have a tendency to check emails all the time. And it's not helpful because sometimes I don't have the time to answer an email that just came in, and then I may not go back to it. So you want to have what's recommended for most people is 3 periods of about 20 minutes a day when you check your email, and then you shut it off whenever possible. So that's one thing. And making phone calls. When I'm writing, during a period of my day when I'm very focused, I write away from my desk. And if there's calls, the voicemail will take it because I have to focus. And if I take every call that comes in, I would never get anything done. So planning with your executive function challenges in mind, there are a few things that you're probably doing that could be improved with an ADHD-friendly solution. So one thing is the to-do list, or your to-do lists, or your to-do book for many people. You want to move that and get away from those things because they require a lot of prioritization, as I mentioned before. They don't really tell you a whole lot of information about what you need to do when. And how long it's going to take, what's more prioritized versus something else. It's a lot. It lacks a lot of information. You want instead to use a priorities list. That first client that I was talking about who owned the construction company, the first time she came to me, she had somewhere around 600, I think I had counted 684 tasks on her to-do list. We counted it together because I couldn't believe that she was trying to manage all of this. Some of those things were things that finding some documents for income tax returns she hadn't filed 5 years ago and 4 years ago, and all of those years. Are you going to treat that in the same way as you're going to treat something you have to do, like a proposal for a client tomorrow, as an example? A priorities list, the difference between a priorities list and a to-do list is a priorities list is a list that you make once you've looked at all your projects and determined what needs to be done this week and this week only. So those things that you'll do in 6 months, they don't fall into that list. Prioritizing tasks. So you're prioritizing one to do against the other, looking at task 1 versus task 2 on your to-do list and say, oh, task 2 is more important. Between task 2 and task 3 now, oh, 2 is still more important. Between task 2 and task 4, oh, 4 is more important. Imagine doing that for, 20 tasks. I'm not even going to go with my that crazy 684 tasks. Prioritizing task is not the ideal situation for you. You want to prioritize by projects. And what that means is dividing all your tasks into different projects that are going on. And a couple of things happen with that. Number one, you become a lot more mindful of the number of projects that you have going on. The ideal situation is to have no more than 5 to 7, depending on the type of projects that you're leading. Estimating time is a challenge. Triple the amount of time you think it's going to take. You determine approximately how long it's going to take. So if it's a 5-minute task, plan it as if it was a 45-minute task. If it doesn't take that long, bonus. Okay. Another thing that you could do that will help you gain more data about how long things take to really complete is to have an actual calendar. The group that I just ended yesterday, one of the girls said that was one of the things that really made a big difference for her. She said having an actual calendar. So if you have a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar, or you're using iCal, you can have multiple calendars, and one of those could be your actual. What that means is maybe I've scheduled this, but actually it took me this amount of time. So next time when you try to schedule this type of task, you'll be a lot more aware of how long it took. Your working memory issues, never allow yourself to use your memory. Don't allow, especially things that are really important. Instead, have one place where you know everything and something that you take with you everywhere. The majority of us own a smartphone, and the majority of us sleep with our smartphone. So having an app in there in which you take note of whatever comes to mind, because you'll have great ideas, but you'll also remember things that you were supposed to do, or people will ask you to do certain things that you forgot to do, or you don't want to forget to do. So you want to be able to capture that somewhere so you don't rely on your memory to determine what's next. In part because you're dealing with to-dos, you're not prioritizing by project, you're not planning, you're struggling with estimating how long it takes to do things, so you overcommit. So my number one strategy for that is to have a way of delaying the commitment with a script. So I have my clients often get used to, instead of saying, oh, that sounds interesting, because you know what happens, people come to you and they say, oh, I've got this thing going on and I'd love for you to be part of my project and you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be cool. And you get all excited and yeah, okay, I'll do it. Except that you've already got too much on your plate and you're barely making it happen. And you're stressed and people around you are stressed. So instead of saying, yeah, you need a new impulse. You need to create a new impulse. So you do that with a script. So a script could look like, oh gosh, that looks really interesting. I would love to be part of your project, but I have to check what I've got because I want to make sure that if I commit to you, I can meet my commitments. It's really important to me. So doing that allows you to delay that commitment and to check. And maybe you can move things around and that will allow you to take it on. Or maybe you can't and say, well, I can't, but if you need some ideas, I can help you. Overwhelm. A lot of people with ADHD get overwhelmed. And I think it's probably worse right now because we are in this COVID, there's a huge amount of stress. There is so much going on. We're having to do so much that we've never done before. So one thing you want to do with overwhelm is honor your need to recharge. You are probably more exhausted. Your cortisol level, the stress hormone, your cortisol levels are probably higher than they've ever been before. So you need to honor time to chill because it's hard on your system. And when you don't allow yourself time to recharge, and especially during periods in your day when you are tired, you will actually get overwhelmed. That's when you're more likely to lose your capabilities or your ability to do what really needs to be done. And of course, with lack of focus, you want to be able to manage your focus. And I'll be talking about that soon. Okay, I'll give you some information. So that's exactly what we're talking about now, your energy level. So I've been working as a coach since 2005, and I've noticed that people with ADHD tend to have certain levels of energy at certain parts of the day. And they're not all the same, but those parts of the day are always, they are a pattern. So if you get to understand those different types of energy that you are dealing with every day, you are a lot more likely to be able to manage that. So let's talk about the 3 types of energy levels. And these are names that I've given them. You can call them whatever you want. The first one is genius. The genius zone is the most important because your genius zone is that period of your day when you are able to focus. And most ADHDers don't. They're surprised that they can focus like that. Some of them say, I hyper focus. Yes, you do. So it's not a lack of focus. It's being able to manage that focus. So your genius zone is that period when you can focus. And even if you're doing something that you really love, that really captures your attention, that speaks to your strengths, you can actually hyper focus in your genius zone. There's, of course, the kinetic zone, and that's a period of your day when you feel like you need to move, or your mind is churning more than normal. You're starting to have a whole bunch of ideas and so on. And then finally, you have a recharge zone. Actually, we usually have several recharge zones. We have normally 2 genius zones under the right conditions, a couple of kinetic zones, and a couple of recharge zones. Now, recharge is when you are brain dead. And the difference between the recharge zone for a neurotypical and the recharge zone for an ADHDer is like the difference between the top of the Grand Canyon and the valley within the canyon. So your energy is completely dropped during that period of time. Recharge zone is not a good time to start anything that's going to require any sort of mental, especially mental energy. Kinetic zone, you still have some mental energy. And so doing short tasks that require some focus can work with kinetic zone. So how do you optimize your ability to manage that energy? So it starts first with taking care of your brain. So we talked about earlier sleep and exercise and Zen time and having some structure. That's part of brain care, is really taking care of. I would also include in that what you eat. If you eat a lot of sugar, or if you drink wine or alcohol, a lot of alcohol, it does affect your ability to focus the next day. Brain care is truly important. The other thing is managing your energy. So that starts with actually knowing when those 3 different types of energy occur in your daytime. And as I mentioned before, they will occur more than once. Okay. So, and that means doing some observation throughout the day as to, like, I'm trying to focus. When am I actually able to focus? The next one is then once you know what your energy patterns are, you can match your task and what they require with the level of energy that they require. So if I have a task like writing is not a task that you can do during your kinetic zone, and even less during your recharge zone. It is a task that requires a huge amount of focus for a long period of time. So you want to be doing that at a time when you're most focused and most able to sit still. I do that. Mine is in the morning. I have one in the morning. I have one in the evening. My morning one it's amazing what I could do during that morning genius zone. And my husband has ADHD, and he's amazing during his genius zones. He's got 2 and they're very good. Both of them are very good. So once you know that, once you're able to match those tasks to the right energy, you can make a huge difference. And of course, it's managing your environment. And that means creating some of those conditions that will allow you to focus when you need to focus. Of the 3 types of energy during the day, you want to especially protect your genius zone, that period of your day when you can focus, because you are able to do in 3, 4, 5 hours what most people do in 8 hours a day, just by really planning well during that time and really getting rid of all environmental distractions. So let's talk about distractions. Number 1, you want to manage visual distractions. Now, creating a space, because some of us do not have, I work from home. I've been working from home for a long time now, but some of us do not have specific space for ourselves. We don't have a desk or an office or whatever. So ideally you find a corner of a room that's clear of any sort of distractions where you can work. And that means possibly if there's a lot of stuff on that area, you may need to put stuff, box it, and schedule some time to go through it at another time. Now, some of you will not work well with doing it like that. Some of you may need the visual, may need to be around people. So sitting in the corner may not work for you. So what I'm telling you here is what I see for most people. But if it doesn't work for you, it does not work for you. Okay, so don't think that there's something wrong with you. When you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. Everybody is so different. So managing your mind is another one. That means during the time when you are doing work, especially focused work, instead of allowing your mind to take you to all kinds of places. Oh, I thought, you think of something. Oh, that's interesting. You go and you jump on the internet to do a search, a Google search. And then 20 minutes later or 2 hours later, you realize, oh, shucks, I was supposed to do this other stuff. Or thinking, oh my gosh, I was supposed to do that, and then jumping to that thing. Instead, use a catch-all list. That's a list that it could be the same list that you take with you everywhere, where you capture things that pop up in your mind so that you don't allow yourself to be distracted. You don't allow yourself to forget them. And then you need to set some time every day to check it. If I know that there's something that I noted that I had forgotten that needs to be done soon, as soon as the task that I had planned, especially during my genius zone, as soon as that's done, I'll look at my catch-all list and make sure that whatever it is can be done within the time that I might have for the rest of the day, or to make sure that I don't have to do it now that I'm finished that first task. You want to manage your communications. Really difficult to do. It seems like we rely more and more, given that we're far away from each other, on communication. So we're receiving more emails. We get text messages like nonstop, and calls, nonstop calls. So managing communications means batching emails. As I mentioned before, batching those emails. Even text, I would, especially during the genius zone, I don't answer text messages. I'll look at them quickly, but I don't, and it's not all text messages that I get notifications for, because otherwise I get distracted. I usually shut down notification for text. So, and then you check it later. And then, of course, you may need to tell people, this is what I'm doing right now, because during this period, I need to focus. And every time something like that happens, I'm losing some precious time and I can't get my work done for you guys. So set some specific time to do those things. Manage your productivity. Use a quiet body double. So managing your productivity, we do when I do groups, we usually also offer productivity hours as a bonus. Productivity hours are those periods, and you can actually recreate this, which is really cool. And this is one of those creative approaches that works beautifully for people with ADHD, is finding someone else that you can work with. They don't have to be in the same physical building as you. I've seen people meet, and that's what we do. We meet people on Zoom, our group on Zoom, and each person decides what they're going to do. They mention it verbally, or they'll write it in the chat, and then they go on to do what they need to do. And the fact that there's other people working, there's a tendency to work on what you had planned to do 90% of the time. Sometimes it doesn't work because it may not be the right time of the day for you to do that type of task. But people have said that it's life-changing to use a body double. If you've lost your body double because you're not working at the office anymore, and you've lost your cubicle colleagues and so on, recreate that body double, because you're not the only one who's struggling with that. Maybe some of your colleagues are as well. And then set boundaries. Manage those drop-ins. With the kids, you may need to, first of all, if the kids are old enough They may just need to be told, okay, I need to work on this. I need some quiet. You come and see me if this happens. Sometimes we have to tell them specifically, but we need to set boundaries. And with our kids, but also with adults. There's adults around us that take advantage of us thinking that, oh, well, you're home so you could do anything. That's not true. Unfortunately, some of us are very fortunate to still be working. It also means that you do have to set boundaries and let people know. So finally, you want to be able to work as a team if you're with a spouse. You know, I use the 3 kids, a dog, a cat, and a goldfish, let's say. So there are things that you can do. Number one is if you're 2 partners, you want to be able to identify each partner's energy pattern and help them with that. You also want to be able to help each person gets to work during their genius zone whenever possible. You need to plan and you need to share your schedules to make sure you negotiate good times for you guys to work. And that's it. That was my presentation. Now, some of you may want to know more about the Genius Zone and all of these things. You can grab a free report at creativegeniusreport.com. Join my free 10 or join my free 10-week course. My 10-week course is more for newbies. So if you go, it's not free. It's usually $77, but if $77 US, but if you go at Adult ADHD Solutions and you put in the code COVID free, all in lowercase, you will get it for free. So that is my gift to you today. And thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Linda. That was excellent. Lots of questions. So we'll go right to it. Do you have a technique for remembering to actually look at your calendar? I put stuff in, but then never follow through by checking it.
Okay. So one thing that you may want to do is create and put that into your morning ritual. Number one. Another thing is one thing that one of my clients was telling me that he does is he injects little fun things that he puts in his weekly calendar. And so every morning he looks forward to finding out what he's reserved for himself, a fun thing that he was going to do today. So he's always got these little surprises that kind of bring him back to the calendar. But having, even having an alert to say, okay, go check your calendar is an important thing. I find most people need to check at least the morning, noon, and at the end of the day to make sure that you're ready for the next day.
Mm-hmm. This one woman has asked, one thing I struggle with task batching, especially phone calls or things I don't enjoy. I tend to ignore those tasks even when scheduled/batched. Any tips for rethinking this?
Totally get that because I struggled a lot with that myself. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you could do with email, whenever possible, for example, email, because that's my biggest, my biggest thorn, the biggest thorn on my side is creating whenever possible, model emails that you don't have to rewrite. It may be that some of those batches need to happen at a time when you have more energy. And it may be also that almost making an appointment, you may need to make appointments with people to call them. I know when I have an appointment in my schedule, I tend to keep it. Even if it's a 15-minute call, is it okay if I call you at this time and you put it in your schedule? That way you're a lot more likely to do it. When you commit to somebody else, the tendency is for most of us to, I say us as if I had ADHD. I'm not sure that I do. I've not been diagnosed, but the tendency for most people is to commit to and to keep their commitments with others. They're not great with keeping them for themselves, though. Mm-hmm. So,
any ADHD-friendly calendars or planners or time management systems you could recommend, digital or paper? A lot of people have asked for examples or things that you would recommend on that front.
Okay, so I teach a system in my Plan to Achieve program, which I'm currently updating, so it's not even available quite right now. It will be in a few weeks. But So the tools that you would use are ideally an electronic calendar. Electronic because there's alerts that you can set. It also allows you, what's really cool, I love the Google Calendar, for example, because a lot of the appointments I make with my own clients or with other people are done through the Google Calendar. We send an invitation to the other person with the link to the call that we have together. And when they respond, it shows up on both calendars with exactly at the right time, the right time zone, and everything else. So I like, whenever possible, using electronic calendars. Some people don't like it. What I have heard that's that's important is your calendar you need to be able to see all 7 days in your calendar. Don't buy something that shows one page at a time. It taxes your memory too much. You're having to remember, what did I schedule when? And then you're constantly going back. So I scheduled this there. It's a mess. And everybody that I've known who have used things like the Franklin calendar that has these 1 page or 2 pages for a day have found that they don't keep it up. It's too much, too taxing on their memory. So you want a 7-day calendar that you could see all of it at once. One that I've heard some good things about in terms of paper calendar, but I haven't used it myself, but I've heard enough of it, was the Planner Pad. Planner Pad, I've heard quite a few good things about it from a lot of my resources. Most of my clients use electronic agendas, but Planner Pad has been very helpful for quite a few people. And for your lists, you want to have ideally electronic lists, but you don't have to have electronic lists if you do not, if you plan in one specific place. I used to do both. I used to have an electronic calendar with lists. My project lists were on folders. They were on different colored folders, and inside I would put any information, any paper or knowledge that I might have about these projects. And so always having those lists can be helpful there. Or one of the tools that a lot of people use is either OneNote or Evernote to grab their information, because one of the nice things about that is wherever you happen to be, those things also synchronize with your phone, with your devices. Mm-hmm. So you're more likely to be able to capture information when it shows up in your mind.
There are several people here who have asked, they don't have the catfish, the dog, or the spouse. They're basically living alone, and they are feeling very challenged in terms of creating structure for themselves. So do you have some separate strategies for people who are either out of work, living alone, or just living alone, and they're trying to find some kind of way to be productive?
Absolutely. So the number one thing I would say is start with a routine that will anchor you. So having a morning routine, having a consistent bedtime and a consistent wake up, that will already, my daughter is out of work right now, my youngest daughter. Mm-hmm. And when she's out of work, she starts losing her self-esteem. Like she gets to the point when this has happened a couple of times because of COVID. And so she ends up sleeping, and 3:00 in the afternoon, she wakes up and she feels horrible because nothing has happened in the day. Her husband's gone out to work, but she hasn't done anything. Even if if there's no husband, it's still the same thing. What I have found has helped her and has helped most of my clients is having that consistent morning ritual, having a consistent morning. And if at all, structuring, especially if you're not working, you may want to take advantage of that time to learn new skills. I found a lot of people, that's what they did. And there's so many skills that you can learn online now for very little money. Some of them are even free. You can go on YouTube or even here on ADDitude. There's quite a few things that you can learn. So learning is having some learning that you actually schedule in your calendar. Use your calendar. Even if you're not working, use your calendar, because you have a life and you don't want to waste it, mm-hmm. Watching Netflix all day long.
Right. As tempting as it sometimes is, yes. Yeah. This person has a challenge. I tend to start a task. You might have addressed this, I don't know. Then think of another task I think I should be doing instead. and then end up not doing either and feeling very, very anxious about the whole getting things done and the productive end of things. So is there any way to sort of box in the task you're working on to stay focused on that?
You can. First of all, if you are doing a task that you had planned to do and another one comes to mind, the first thing you need to do is I always have a list, that catch-all list next to me, because it happens to everyone, and to write it so that you can come back to what you had planned to do. The other thing that I did not mention that I should have mentioned is when you are writing, when you are determining what you're planning to do, be extremely precise in what that is going. You're not writing a book, for example. You are writing the first paragraph of the first chapter. That way you could see the end of the task. There's a certain start or an end. Or I had a client who had a book in her head she was trying to write. And so she would write every day, I think it was 1,000 words a day. That's what she would do, 1,000 words a day. So once her computer would say she's written 1,000 words, she could stop. But having those batches, so going back to that catch-all list is having also a time when you review that catch-all list so that you're sure that your catch-all list, so that you don't miss anything that really needs to be done. It's a challenge. Another approach, if it's a short enough task, is to use, they call it the Pomodoro. I would say use a modified Pomodoro. Pomodoro is you set a timer to do a task for about 25 minutes. And when the task, when it rings, you stop and you take a break, or even better than that is to look back at what you've accomplished. Now, why would that work? It's because you're working against the clock. So you have a tendency to focus better on the task that you are doing right now. And for a lot of people, that works. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the body double, finding someone that you could be on Zoom with or on Skype with, or even on the phone, that both of you are working or doing your stuff. You say at the beginning, this is what I'm going to work on. And after an hour, you check in with each other. That works absolutely beautifully, because being alone is, it's not fun. Always spending your time alone is really difficult. So having that body double makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. So
one recommendation from actually one of the attendees, you talked about one of those adjustable desks that you stand in front of. Several people have put their laptops on adjustable ironing boards, believe it or not.
That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I thought
that.
It was. I just wanted to bring it up to everyone who might not have seen that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I don't know if you can answer this in the short time we have left, but one person has a real challenge, and I do too sometimes, prioritizing things. They know they need to do it, but what goes first, what goes second, what goes third? Any advice there?
Absolutely. So when I'm teaching my clients to manage projects rather than to-dos, their lists are by project. So when you're looking at your project, instead of determining, I should do this one first or that one first, is looking at each of the project. What have I accomplished this week in that project? And what 1 to 3 tasks do I need to do this week for this project to progress? Now, and that's what you add to your calendar. It's not, or your priorities list, and then to your calendar. It's not to look through every list every single time to determine. If you've prioritized your projects well, it'll be easier for you to prioritize your tasks. So when my daughter's wedding was going on, I organized my daughter's wedding 2 years ago, and at the beginning, there wasn't too many tasks. So I was working on different things. I was developing some programs. I was doing some marketing. I was working with some clients. Those were the priorities. And every time something new had to be done, I would check every week when I was planning, I would check that project, the wedding project. Oh, we have to secure a DJ, because it was in my backyard. So we didn't have to secure a venue. We have to secure a DJ. So that's something I'm going to add to my calendar right now so that I make sure that it's done. And then I would park that project for a couple of months until the next thing needs to be done. But each week I would review all my projects, determine what needs to be done, and limit the number of projects you're working on any given time. What happens is if you prioritize the wrong task within the same project, you will know relatively quickly. And you could say, oops, I realized that I can't finish this task until that one's been done. And then you can quickly, so you'll learn from actually getting into action. And sometimes that's the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So prioritizing by project rather than by task. And within the project, prioritizing only a few tasks a week for each of your projects so that all of them are moving along, they're all progressing. And then if you prioritize the wrong task within that project, you'll know relatively quickly because you'll see that there's something missing or there's an information that you need to do, or this should have been done before, so you can stop. But at least you will have prioritized your projects.
Right. Well,
Other than that, sometimes it's not always easy to determine.
Right. That's for sure. Well, I think the hour is up. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise. I thought it was excellent.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you for inviting me. And and communication happens when not only do you have anything to say, but other people are hearing you. So
right. So. And thanks to all of the attendees for joining us. Please join us next week when Brendan Mahan will talk about healthy, less stressful parenting strategies for managing strong emotions in teens in these days of the pandemic. So thanks again, everyone, for being here, and have a great day.